So thank you very much for having me here. My name is Minda Berbeco, and I'm from the National Center for Science Education. And I'm going to be talking about climate and energy literacy, a new direction for science education in the 21st century. So in formal education in the US, there's a huge number of students available that are a captive audience for teaching about different areas in the sciences, particularly climate and energy issues. Can you use this? And a good majority of them are in primary and secondary school, which is great because here you have this great audience to work with. And yet at the same time, there are lots of challenges to climate and energy literacy. And the way that I think about it is sort of twofold. There's the things that happen that are sort of structural outside of the classroom, and there are the things that happen that are inside the classroom when the teacher closes the door. So the first set is really about providing reliable long-term funding for curriculum and lesson plans. And right now the way it's sort of set up is that there's sort of these starts and stops, and the government sort of changes its mind about education funding, and then all of a sudden people aren't able to put together as much information or get the information out to as many teachers, which is a major challenge. Another challenge is professional development and accessing educators. So there are many educators who are interested, but they don't necessarily know all of the material that's available for them. And then the second set of issues are really what happened when the teacher closes the door, because what happens inside the classroom isn't necessarily related to what the standards are or what curriculum is available. So these have to do with whether or not the teacher perceives relevance to the students' lives, whether or not the teacher perceives that there's a relationship to the standards, if they feel like there's classroom time or they need to skip over material, and also concern regarding pushback and misinformation campaigns as well from either administrators, other teachers, or even their own students. So to address these many challenges, my organization, the National Center for Science Education, put together a Climate and Energy Literacy Summit. And we did it here at the Brower Center in Berkeley, California. And this was sort of an unconference style. So there were no speakers. It was only working groups for 3 whole days. And the idea was to get a large group of people associated with climate and energy literacy to education together to create a collective brain trust, if you will, of what we've done so far and where we need to go from here. So from now on, what I'm going to be talking about is not necessarily what NCSC is up to, but really what all these educational groups came together and decided what we need to do to move forward. So who are the groups involved? Well, we didn't just stick with nonprofits like ourselves. We had museums and zoos and aquariums. We had professional organizations. We had federal organizations as well. We did have some nonprofits and some communication organizations. Universities were involved, and also for-profit education companies as well, which shouldn't be left out of the conversation for sure. And what we gave them as their task for these 3 days was to work collectively to substantially and measurably improve climate and energy literacy, to provide society and the next generation with a scientific foundation to take informed actions to minimize climate impact and prepare for changes that are already well underway. So that's a lot of information. And our question to them was, what does this mean, this paragraph? What does this mean to you, and how can we move this forward? So there were a lot of different questions that bounced around over these 3 days. And some of the questions were the following. What is the role of formal and informal education, and how can they best support each other and work together? What are the social challenges that they're facing bringing these issues into the classroom? And also, how can they better take advantage, or how can we better take advantage of new media tools to increase the knowledge base outside of classrooms and even outside of informal education? So in the end, what we came up with got put into a white paper, which is available here, and it's also available online, and it was released this past February. And I'm going to talk about some of the key recommendations that came out of it, but there's a whole lot that was discussed. And so I'm going to focus mostly on the things that we've already moved forward with as a group, as an educational group, but there are many more things to do as well. So the first key recommendation was supporting initiatives to bring climate and energy literacy into the classroom. And the easiest way to do this is through the next generation science standards. So for those who are not familiar with science standards right now, each state basically has its own science standards. So, and they differ greatly from each other. So for example, a state like Georgia has very detailed science standards, whereas Iowa hardly has any science standards at all. And that doesn't mean that they're not learning science in Iowa, and it doesn't mean that they're learning better science in Georgia. It's just that if you're a student in Georgia and you move to Iowa, your experience might be very different and what you learn is very different. So then if you go off to college or if you move anywhere else in the country, you might actually have a very different knowledge base about science. And so the nice thing about the next generation science standards was it's a state-led initiative of K through 12 science standards that's meant to sort of create common standards between the states. So students don't have this challenge if they move around. If they go to college or when they become adults, they'll have similar knowledge base to work from. The nice thing about these standards is that they include climate change science and human impacts on natural systems in both middle school and high school. And this is great. And so that's not to say that state standards don't include that. Many of them do. But it's nice to have that common consistency between the states, and it'll look more similar between the states as a result. So, so one of the things we discussed as a group was really supporting states to bring next generation science standards into their state. The next thing was that, taking advantage of teachable moments. And a really obvious one that was discussed yesterday was the National Climate Assessment. And for those who are not necessarily familiar with the National Climate Assessment, the nice thing about it is that it's broken up by different parts of the country, and this is something that teachers are always looking for, is how is climate impacting my part of the country so I can teach my kids about this. And so, so we have an education affinity group associated with the National Climate Assessment. If anyone's interested in joining it, you're more than welcome to. And what we're doing is we're going to take the assessment and break it up into digestible information, FAQs, and that sort of thing, suggestions on how teachers can use this in the classroom. And then the last thing is using professional development associated with the National Climate Assessment and also the Next Generation Science Standards for the different teacher organizations to make sure that we're going out and providing the professional development for the teachers regarding these issues. So the second key finding that we had was to expand educational opportunities. And this gets more into new media, which is great because we should be taking advantage of resources that are available to us. The first was to develop and deploy online courses. So I don't know if you're already familiar, but there are a couple that have just come out on Coursera. They're called massively open online courses. Yeah. I saw you mouthing that. Massively open online courses. And it's a way of sort of circumventing traditional educational resources through classrooms or even through informal education to be able to reach more students who are interested in this information. The second is creating even more online teacher resources and student resources. And so this is something that NCSC is working with the UC Museum of Paleontology right now on a project called Understanding Global Change. And what that is going to be a sort of one-stop shop on information related to global change issues as a way of assisting teachers in additional information about climate change and also other global change issues. The next major finding that we had was that the need for a national survey. So NCSC and the UCMP did a smaller survey for our Understanding Global Change project. We wanted to know what teachers were teaching, why they were teaching it, what they considered part of global change, and what they didn't. And it was actually very interesting. We're going to be presenting that information in the coming years as we do more analysis of the data that we've gotten. But it's quite interesting because it turns out that teachers don't necessarily see disease or phenology related to global change, but they definitely see other things that are sort of more popular in the media related to global change. And this made it clear that we really need a national survey to figure out what teachers are teaching, why they're teaching it, how they're teaching it. Are they teaching climate change in terms of a controversy, or are they teaching it just straight on the science? Are they including policy? All of those sorts of things. And then the last piece is sort of NCSE's bread and butter, which is defending against manufactured doubt. And this is what we focus a lot on. And this at NCSE, and now with our new collaborators, we're working to track challenges to good quality science education in classrooms related specifically to climate change science, and support teachers when necessary to make sure that the good science is being taught. In addition, we also follow misinformation campaigns and lesson plans, and I'm actually going to be talking about that later today if you're interested in that at 11 o'clock. And ultimately, what this all comes down to is that we very strongly believe, as a group, that students have a right to know about the science behind climate change and how their energy choices impact our environment. And this is a fundamental concept. It's just unfair to not teach them the science. And so far, there's been many valiant efforts through organizations like CLEAN and so on to try to bring that into the classroom. But we need to move to the next level where we're all working collaboratively together. So there were many, many more suggestions and findings that I don't have time to get into now, but I did want to talk about one final one, which is a major challenge for all of us, which is securing large-scale funding for all organizations. And so some things that were discussed at the summit was public-private partnerships in which private organizations and public organizations come together to fund a larger spectrum of lesson plans, curriculums, programs, and that sort of thing. And so we're still working on what that would look like. Thank you very much.